Hey, how you doing? Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining me. I'm Tim. This is the Noisy Records podcast, and actually, this is our very first one, so it's extra special just because this is how we're kicking it off, but also because you're here, and I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Today, we're going to talk about Goth, so get ready for it. I think you're going to learn some cool stuff. You're going to hear some cool stuff, and what the heck, it's just entertaining and a good laugh. So grab a drink, grab your coffee, grab a glass of wine, and hey, if you're so inclined, crawl back in your coffin and get snuggled up because we're about to kick it off. And here we go with tonight's podcast theme of Goth. I was a teenage goth. No, really, I was. I ate jelly beans with Siouxsie and the Banshees. One night, while having dinner with The Cure, they introduced me to sangria for my very first time. I took members of the cult down to a local dive bar in my neighborhood and shot pool. I became friends with the dudes in Flesh for Lulu. And one year, I even invited Gene Loves Jezebel over to my house for Thanksgiving dinner. I'll tell you another little secret. I broke Daniel Ash's couch while at his house filming a music video. That's just between us. I guess you could say I hung out with some of the big names in the scene, and in this episode, I'm going to talk about Goth. goth as I knew it, the initial era of goth, or as I like to say, the golden age of goth. That's the goth I knew and was a part of. And to me, that's why I have such a real fondness for the scene, and I still do. But to me, though, that era, true goth, is dead. I know there's different styles out there and artists that people say are goth, but no. To me, goth died by the end of the 80s. In today's terminology, the period of goth that I lived through, that I was part of, that's called, well, the kids like to call that trad goth or traditional goth. For me, that's where it all starts and ends. So let's look back, see how it all started, what happened along the way, who's who, and how it ended. Expect the unexpected in this tale, because truth is stranger than fiction. The story of how goth music came to be is nothing short of bizarre or even unbelievable. Some of the milestone records were made in the strangest of circumstances, or by happy accidents, if you will. Obviously, though, the best place to start is the beginning, and the very beginning of goth is 1956. Musically speaking, goth originated with a black dude from Cleveland, Ohio, who was actually raised by Blackfoot Indians. He had a lifelong goal to become an opera singer and learn piano, but things didn't turn out the way he planned. He joined the Army underage, thanks to having a forged birth certificate, and while in the Army he got involved in boxing. Actually ended up becoming the middleweight champion of Alaska. He was also wounded in battle and captured by the Japanese and held as a prisoner of war. When he left the Army and his boxing gloves behind, he decided he wanted to continue music, and he joined a band. He ended up playing with Fats Domino for about a year and then went solo, fancying himself as a real blues artist, singing about booze and women. No one else bought it, though. He did end up getting a record deal, but wasn't having any success. That is, until one night he wrote the ballad that he thought would make him a worldwide star. He convinced the label to give him another shot and let him record his new song. The label agreed, but they wanted to try something different. So before the session began, they called him and his band in and said, "Let's have a party," and turned him loose with a table filled with booze, fried chicken, and ribs. Needless to say, he and his band got drunk, and I mean blind drunk. In his scrambled state of mind, as he was standing at the mic, he thought, rather than croon my way through this, I'm going to destroy this new song, and I'm going to scream and grunt the whole way through. What does that have to do with goth, you ask? Everything. This drunken black dude yelling down a microphone is the actual beginning of what we know as goth. Hearing the playback, the label knew this was a winner. And from that moment on, an unknown Siouxsie Hawkins was dubbed Screamin' Jay Hawkins. And the song he just recorded, I Put a Spell on You, was the song that made him world famous and became a big hit on the radio. Initially, the record sold 1 million copies, but some radio stations banned it because they thought with all the grunting and groaning, it was too overtly sexual. He even got in trouble by the NAACP because they thought that all this grunting and groaning on his new record would reflect badly back on black people. In spite of it, though, it made history. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame actually awarded this song as one of the 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. More important and unbelievable, this song right here is the beginning of goth.
I put a spell on you. Because you're mine. Stop the things you do. What's up? I ain't lying. Yeah, I can't stand. Woo! No running around. I can't stand. No putting me down. put a spell on you. Because you're mine. Oh, yeah. Stop the things you do. What's up? I ain't lying. Oh, oh, I love you. I love you. I love you anyhow. I don't care if you don't want me. I'm yours right now. I'll put a spell on you. Because you're mine, mine, mine. Oh, you're mine.
With a new name and a brand new hit, he needed a new gimmick for his upcoming live shows. Screamin' Jay was actually friends with Alan Freed, the famous rock and roll DJ, and it was Alan Freed who dared Screamin' Jay to dress up as a voodoo priest and start his concerts with him rising up out of a coffin. Jay, understandingly, refused, saying, "Ain't no black dude gets into a coffin alive." Then Freed put his hand in his pocket, pulled out money, and started laying down bills. He offered him $300. "Just try it," he said. Screamin' Jay agreed. Screamin' Jay's stage shows were a hit, just like the record. And it all started there. Goth, shock rock. That's where Alice Cooper, Kiss, dudes like Marilyn Manson got all their ideas from. Screamin' Jay. Now, Screamin' Jay may have somewhat faded away as a novelty act, but the bats were released, so to speak. Over the next 10 years, those little black seeds were cast, but no one knew where they would sprout up, or even if they would, and if they did, what to call them. That is until 1967 with The Doors. They had just released their second album, Strange Days, and a music critic named John Stickney had reviewed the album, saying this new record was more terrifying than their first. While in New York City, Stickney was sent to interview the band at the Delmonico Hotel. He actually came face to face with the band and their groupies in the wine cellar located in the basement of the hotel. And Stickney wrote of this meeting, stating it was the perfect room to honor the gothic rock of the Doors. And this is where the term gothic was first applied to music. Were the Doors really goth? No, I don't think so. But I guess you could consider their organs kind of spooky, and Jim's brooding persona and his leather pants definitely help add an air of mystery around the band. I guess his reciting poetry made him somewhat of a romantic, which many goths like as well. Their influence was pretty undeniable, and yes, it was so even in the goth world. Many have even claimed that Ian Curtis copied Jim Morrison's vocal style, and some people say you can hear echoes of it in Andrew Eldritch with the Sisters of Mercy. But you know what? There's no denying the influence the Doors made on Ian Astbury, because when the Doors reformed, it was Ian Astbury who filled in for the dead Jim Morrison.
Take the highway to the end of the night, end of the night, end of the night. Take a journey to the bright midnight, end of the night, end of the night. Realms of bliss, realms of light. Some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to the endless night, end of the night, end of the night, end of the night, end of the night. Realms of bliss, realms of light, some are born to sweet delight, some are born to sweet delight, some are born to the endless night, end of the night. End of the night, end of the night, end of the night.
That same year, soon-to-be MTV News host Kurt Loder copped the term in his review of the debut album by the Velvet Underground. He said that All Tomorrow's Parties was a mesmerizing gothic rock masterpiece. I guess you can easily see and hear what they both meant. The jangly the guitars and the droniness of the Velvets definitely provided a blueprint for up-and-coming goths. Maybe even the way they dressed, all in black. Though me, personally, I haven't seen many goths wearing turtlenecks like Lou did.
And what costume shall the poor girl wear to all tomorrow's parties? A hand-me-down dress from who knows where to all tomorrow's parties. And where will she go? What shall she do when midnight comes around? She turned once more to Sunday's clown and cried behind the door. And what costume shall the poor girl wear to all tomorrow's parties? Why, silks and linens of yesterday's gowns to all tomorrow's parties. And what will she do with Thursday's rags when Monday comes around? She turned once more to Sunday's clown
cry behind the door. And what costume shall the poor girl wear to all tomorrow's parties? For Thursday's child is Sunday's clown, for whom none will go mourning. Blackened shroud, a hand-me-down gown of rags and silks, a costume fit for one who sits and cries for all tomorrow's parties.
As with most things in music, it's all linked together, and we couldn't have had goth without punk. And punk arrived roughly 10 years after those Doors and Velvets records we were just talking about. In punk, it was the real blurring of musical boundaries. They loved reggae, they loved glam, and it's just that mushing it all together, which helped to bolster the would-be goth scene. In fact, for a short while, before it was called goth, they were called positive punks. But the most obvious punks that set the stage for goth had to be the Damned. We have to include the Damned as early purveyors of goth, even though we're not really sure at the time if they even really knew they wanted to be goth. Remember though, the Damned were the first quote-unquote punk band to release a single with New Rose. Funnily enough, the B-side was a cover of the Beatles' Help. The Damned were also the first quote-unquote punk band to release an LP. Their music though, it wasn't dark or spooky or even jangly. But it was obvious that the frontman, Dave Lett, a.k.a. Vanian, got his last name from Transylvania, one who came from Transylvania, get it, Vanian, definitely had a fetish for the look. He's adorned as some sort of ghouly thing or vampire on both the debuts, the single and the album. By the time the Damned had released their fourth single, Stretcher Case Baby, you could definitely see they were flirting with the imagery because they had a big skull on it, and they had their name written in an old Germanic font. By the time we get to 1979 and they release their third album, Machine Gun Etiquette, there's definitely something going on. Right there on the cover, Dave Vanian is wearing a cape as the band were photographed walking across 7th Avenue there in New York City. There's also a song on the album written for Dave's all-time dream gal, Vampira, called Plan 9 Channel 7. Their goth tendencies started to become even more realized the next year with the Black Album, which featured a headstone overgrown with ivy around it. But it wasn't until '84, at the height of when goth was really happening, when Captain Sensible left the band, that Vanian was able to fully embrace his goth persona, as well as turn his whole band into the perfect group of ghouls. Their 1985 album Phantasmagoria officially earned them their goth membership card.
Stand in the shadow of love. The hour is late and you know the time waits for no one.
So punk came and went. Now what? Well, the generic tag used for a lot of the new music that came out of the ashes of punk was simply billed as post-punk. Lurking somewhere in that post-punk scene were the forerunners of goth. And those two main acts were Siouxsie and the Banshees and Joy Division. We have to remember the Banshees' debut came out in '78, and it was heralded as a milestone and a forerunner in the genre. In fact, it was actually Siouxsie and the Banshees who were first tagged as post-punk. They released the second album, Join Hands, in '79, but it was no great shakes. The Cure, too, made their debut in '79 with Three Imaginary Boys. Though those two acts would be vital in the goth scene, at this time, neither of them had found their sound, and goth didn't officially exist. However, things did change with these next two bands and their records. Their records will make 1979 year zero for what we now know as goth. And it's also interesting to note, both of these records were debuts as well. Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures and Bauhaus's Bela Lugosi's Dead. Let's be honest though, there would be no Joy Division without the Banshees. They were a huge influence on both the band and their would-be producer Martin Hannett. Peter Hook admitted that seeing the Banshees helped form the vision for Joy Division, as did Robert Smith. He was actually thinking of taking the Cure in the direction of Elvis Costello, believe it or not. But after playing with the band on their Join Hands tour, it became clear what direction the Cure should go. Robert Smith said, "I was blown away by how powerful I felt playing that music." Did you know that Robert Smith was a Banshee twice? First in '79, then again in '83. Here's another one to knock you sideways. There would be no Radiohead if it wasn't for Siouxsie and the Banshees. It's true! Tom York said seeing Siouxsie and the Banshees live in 1985 was the thing that made him wanted to be a performer. So there you have it. Anyway, let's get back to Joy Division. They released their debut album, Unknown Pleasures, in 1979. This is a murky one, literally. The album was recorded in barely a week, and this is the one album that blurs those lines between post-punk and goth. Initially, the Enemy said this was an opaque manifesto, and it was also described as Gary Glitter meets the Velvet Underground. Smash Hits said the album was a bleak nightmare soundtrack. But the Melody Maker, they didn't buy any of it. They went on to say Ian Curtis was Jim Morrison without the flair. A large part of what made this record so unique, though, in its sound and its vision, was due to its producer, Martin Hannett. It's been said that his production techniques were just as important as the music itself. In fact, the music wouldn't have been the same without him. One critic said it was the way he used space and echo, that it was the most important way it was used since the invention of dub. And it's exactly that cavernous, plodding, echoey sound which made Peter Hook so irritated. He thought Martin Hannett had ruined their sound, and now their debut album just sounded like Pink Floyd, he said. Hannett, though, he liked what he created and said it was actually a joy to work with Joy Division because they didn't know what they were doing. He would tell them what to do or give them a suggestion, and wham, they would do it. They didn't argue. When someone asked Hannett how he would describe Joy Division, he said it was dancing music with gothic overtones. Did you catch that? Gothic overtones, not goth. Joy Division could never have been goth looking the way they did. They looked like part-time help in the Sears shoe department with their slacks and their little button-up short-sleeve dress shirts.
Forced by the pressure, the territory's marred. No longer the pleasure. Oh, I've since lost the heart. Corrupted from memory, no longer the power. It's creeping up slowly, that last fatal hour. Oh, I don't know what made me, what gave me the right to mess with your value and change wrong to right. Please keep your distance. The trail leads to here. There's blood on your finger, brought on by fear. I can't pay for nothing. I worked hard for this. I try to get to you. You treat me like this. It's just second nature. It's what we've been shown. We're living by your rules. That's all that we know. I try to get to you. I try to get to you. I try to get to you. Oh, I try to get to you.
No one could have expected Northampton to be ground zero for this new genre, but it was in this small town 60 miles north of London that Goth's ghastly shape became a reality. The nucleus for what would be the very first true Goth record came together out of a love for reggae, Debbie Harry, and a fascination with a silver screen vampire. Bauhaus, they had no clue history was about to be made. How could they? They had only been together about a month. They pulled together all their money to come up with about $12 and headed a few miles away to what was basically a home studio where Peter Murphy lived. The band would go on and record 4 songs during this session, and they could barely see each other in the studio due to the chain-smoking engineer. The room was full of smoke. Peter Murphy had a cold, and David J. had this bass line and a few ideas about Bela Lugosi he was anxious to try out. It was all done in one take. What you hear on the record is basically how it all went down. It was instantaneous and would prove to be a real moment. All 9 minutes and 37 seconds caught on tape, which would start the whole modern Goth movement. The coffin lid was removed, and Goth finally awoke with its own sound and became incarnate in the flesh in Bauhaus. I know it sounds silly, but reggae played a big part in Goth. Daniel Ash had been toying with this reggae riff, which turned out to be the song Harry, and it's the song he wrote for Debbie Harry, and it was recorded during the same session. And they used to use this song, this reggae tune, to audition their possible bass players. Hello, David J. Anyway, Because Bauhaus loved reggae so much, they weren't afraid to show it in their music. Think about it. They put out a couple singles with dub versions on the B-side. There's Satori, In Fear of Dub, Here's the Dub, and there would be other goth acts to do the same thing, releasing these dub-heavy singles as well, like Killin' Joke and Alien Sex Fiend. But now that you're aware of that weird cross-section of dub and reggae and goth, take a listen and see if you can hear the reggae backbone in Bela Lugosi's Dead, the very first true goth record.
Translucent black capes back on the rack. Bela Lugosi's dead. The bats have left the bell tower. The victims have been bled. Red velvet lines. The black box. Bela Lugosi's dead. Bela Lugosi's dead. I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead. I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead. The virginal brides file past his tomb. Still many times their flowers bereft in deathly bloom. Alone in a darkened room, the Count Bela Lugosi's dead. Bela Lugosi's dead.
So now we have a few real goth records, and these help provide the blueprint for others to follow. A year later, in 1980, the Banshees have finally found their sound, and they released Kaleidoscope. And The Cure, they put out their second album, 17 Seconds, both having a totally more identifiable goth sound. It's also the same year, in 1980, that Bauhaus put out their debut album, as well as Killing Joke and Echo and the Bunnymen. Goth is really taking shape, and now, by 1980, we're entering into the golden era of goth. Even though it's only been about a year and it's 1981 now and goth is relatively new, it's gained enough momentum in developing an easily identifiable style in both music and fashion. And this kind of irritates Nick Cave, the front man of the Birthday Party. And you know what? He's already sick of it. As a joke, he decides to record a tune making fun of all these ensuing ghouls that are gathering on the horizon. He just throws everything he can at it and goes over the top. Bats, vampires, sex, biting, yelling, screaming, you name it. But yet, even though it was a joke, this proved to be another key moment for goth and a vital goth tune. Here you go. Have a laugh. This is the Birthday Party with Release the Bats. Like most scenes in Britain, there's a northern scene and a southern scene, and goth was no exception. Many would say it all happened in London, especially at the infamous Batcave, and that's partly true, but the Batcave was actually in the back seat. It was secondary. Truth is, somewhere further up north, up beyond Northampton, was the fertile ground, or dance floor, shall we say, that nurtured this new scene to grow. Tucked away in Leeds was the F Club, or Fan Club as it became known, which ran from about 77 to 82. This is the place where the undead roamed and danced the night away to a mix of glam and punk, as well as putting on gigs by these so-called post-punk bands like Siouxsie and the Banshees, The Cure and Joy Division. These gigs and club nights gave birth to more and more little black seeds that soon formed new bands with names such as Soft Cell, Gang of Four, The Dance Society, March Violets, New Model Army, and Southern Death Cult, just to name a few. And it was in one of these deep, hazy nights of hedonism that two dudes met and another darker soul was born. And this is the story of when Andy met Gary. I'm talking about the fateful meeting between Andrew Eldritch and Gary Marks, which, of course, would turn into the Sisters of Mercy, who, by the way, proved to be the fourth and final cornerstone on which this whole goth scene would be built. of course, the other three cornerstones being Bauhaus, Siouxsie, and The Cure. And so it is, and so it was. Thanks for listening in, guys. Thanks for joining me here on our debut podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you maybe learned something along the way. I know I did when I was researching for this, and hopefully you can understand why I still love this scene. And if you're an ex-goth, or an old goth, I should say, hopefully that warmed your cold, bitter heart and made you feel proud of the old days. You can always write me, and please do, at noisyrecordsmx@hotmail.com. Drop me in line if you have an idea for a future podcast, or have any questions, or just want to say hi. Likewise, look us up on Instagram at Noisy Records on Instagram, and you can stay up to date with us on a daily basis to see what's going on at the shop and get the up-to-the-minute news on when the next podcast or video will be up. Again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for listening. I'm Tim, and thanks for listening to the Noisy Records podcast.